rule of thumb, it's 10 times more expensive and it takes 10 times as long as what you think it's going to be to enter a new geography. And so I hear it all the time in ag tech, and not just ag tech, other tech companies. US is the biggest market. We're going to get to the US. We're going to go to the US, right? Take a flight over there and run around. And yes, it's likely, depending on what industry, US will be your biggest market, but it's also a market that will chew you up and spit you out and spend all your money. And so if you go too early, it's not going to work out for you, right? Things like product market fit, scalability around your product, scalability around your go-to-market. The localization and nuances in those markets are very real from a product software side, from a cultural, social side, are real and are underestimated a lot. And people go too early when they don't have all of that sorted out.
Welcome to the Profitable Farmer podcast, where we share stories and tips to help you run a better farming business and create your very own freedom farm. If you're looking to work smarter and not harder in your farm business, welcome. You're in the right place. G'day everyone. I sincerely hope this season is playing out for you. I know it's already proving challenging for many, so my thoughts are with you. In these interviews with guests on this podcast, I try and make it a bit like a fireside conversation, and I try and have it that I don't quite know what my next question's going to be until my guest has finished speaking, and hopefully that makes for a really authentic and genuine conversation. If this next interview was a fireside conversation, it's kind of a 2 or 3 bottles of red conversation. It was compelling and I enjoyed it so much. I asked John if we could extend it over 2 episodes. So sit back and enjoy my interview with John Fargher, one of the 3 founders of AgriWebb, over 2 episodes. It's an amazing Aussie scale-up, global expansion, ag tech story, and what a great Australian modern company. So to introduce John first, John is a 5th generation farmer, or sheep and cattle farmer, I should say, from South Australia. He grew up on a 400,000 acre Wirialpa station in the Northern Flinders Ranges of South Australia. In a good season, Wirialpa runs 2,500 cattle and 10,000 sheep. His family have a long history of farming in that area and have had a real impact on pastoral agriculture in northern South Australia. John co-founded AgriWebb in 2014 with Justin Webb and Kevin Bowen. AgriWebb is incredible software that replaces our pocket notebook that we've all put through the washing machine copious times to help us precisely measure, record, trace, and manage our farm's performance with a level of efficiency not seen previously or possible before. The company's core philosophy, as John describes it, is farmer first. Everyone at AgriWebb lives by our core value. We live for the farmer, and that makes a world of difference. The platform is now in 25 countries globally, over 23 million head of livestock across more than 150 million acres, which is about $500 billion of agricultural assets, with a dominant presence in Australia, the UK, US, and Brazil. In this first of 2-part interview, I asked John to reflect on his time growing up on a northern and remote sheep and cattle station. I asked him to reflect on how AgriWebb came to be, what the early days were like, and what it took to get this incredible project off the ground. So please sit back, enjoy this conversation, and John, thank you so much for your openness and for your sharing. John, I've been looking forward to this conversation for some time, and I'm really excited to share the AgriWebb story. welcome to Profitable Farmer. How are you?
I'm great, Jeremy. Thank you for having me. Likewise, I've been following you guys from a long time, from the roots of Kangaroo Island, and yeah, mate, excited to have a good chat.
Hey, to kick us off, what was it like growing up on a 400,000 plus remote station in, I think, the Wilpena region in northern South Australia?
Yes. Well, firstly, I didn't know any different. So that was first and foremost. Born and bred out there. We are in that neck of the woods. We're actually about an hour north of Wilpena. So anywhere south of that, Dad would say, "Oh, you're only in the suburbs." So we were very much, very much in the thick of it, in the sticks. But it was a really great upbringing, and ultimately, I'm sort of fifth generation in that area. Many, many moons ago, in the late 1800s, my family sort of settled in a tiny little town called Blinman. Tiny now, population of about 18 people. But back in the late 1800s, there was about 3,000 people there because it was a gold and copper mine. So that was the context. And my great-great-grandfather at the time was a blacksmith in the mine there. So that's kind of where it all started. And then grazing sort of took hold, and, the previous generation started sort of taking up smaller plots of land, and obviously the wool production cycle, kicked into gear. So I've been up there for a long time, and then, ultimately we settled on our family property called Wirri Upper Station, which is up there. But a lot of my uncles and cousins have neighbouring properties. So I think if you talk about the Northern Flinders Ranges, the common thread is if you kick a bush, a Fargher will jump out. Big part of growing up, and we did the whole school of the air type scenario before boarding school. So that was very much what we were born into this world to do, and love it dearly.
What are some of your fondest memories of a remote upbringing like that?
I think at the time it was a pretty unique upbringing. I mean, we didn't go off to the local primary school. We had a governess. We had a whole bunch of jackaroos and jillaroos. We had backpackers that would come in. So from a young age, we were kind of hanging out with the 18, 19, 20-year-old jackaroo jillaroo scenario, which provided a great environment. It was a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, we were living and breathing station life. I mean, it was as early as we could. We were on horses and motorbikes, and particularly then school holidays, Dad would line up all the jobs, as I'm sure is pretty common, of all the big events, cheering, et cetera, et cetera. So that was a lot of fun, and just the generational piece as well. My grandparents lived on farm, and fond memories of going and shooting cockies with the 22 with grandpa every afternoon after school, and all those types of things. So very fond memories, very different life to what I live now. But we still have the property. My folks have kind of recently retired off that, and we lease it out now. But very much get up there with my family and friends, and it's a big part of our life still. So yeah, I think it's from day one, it's been a big part of how I have grown up, but also now how I've taken that into my professional life and gone on to do what we've done. Was a big part of growing up in that environment and thinking about how can we do things better? How can we innovate? How can we set ourselves up for a more, call it, broader, sustainable business? And like every farmer out there, how can we give the land to the next generation in a better place than what we found it? And that's been a big flavour, I would say, from my grandpa that bought our place in 1952, and then obviously Dad's taken that on, and here we are.
John, reflecting back, what do you admire most about the pioneering of your forefathers? And first question. Second question is, how do you feel like that has, and growing up near Parachurna, has shaped you in how you go about what you do now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very tough environment and a tough life because of the remoteness, right? And if you think about, there's been a fair bit of technical advancement recently, but we grew up, and a lot of listeners will be familiar with this, but no power, right? It was very much 32-volt lights, right? Gas fridges, gas stoves. We actually didn't even get 24-hour power until the early 2000s. And so I think the natural remoteness of that, when you talk to people about having to drive 2.5 hours to go to the grocery store, and thinking about what that means, of most people now kind of don't even plan what they're having for dinner that night until 5 p.m. So there's just it's just a completely different way of life. And when I go back in the generations prior, it was only harder, right? And it took a long time to get anywhere. I mean, I think one thing that I reflect on is my grandpa first started on our property. We had a staff of about 40 people. It was all on horseback. We had outstations, right? So you couldn't just go and check waters quickly. You literally had people based around the station, and everything took a long time, right? I mean, our biggest paddock now, but not at the time, given we've kind of made it a bit more manageable. But our biggest paddock's still 200 square kilometres. So riding around on horseback looking for cattle takes a long time. And so I think in those early years, we had a post office, we had a full-time staff of chefs and cooks and cowboys. And like, it was a community. It was a 100% community. And then as time evolves and innovation comes in, one thing that I sort of reflect on is motorbikes came in eventually, right? In call it the sort of late 70s, 80s, I guess it would have been. And then what took literally weeks now takes days. And, a staff of 40 is a staff of 4 or 5. Then the evolution of getting an aircraft, getting a Cessna. And I laugh at a story mum and dad tell, they just got married and they went on a honeymoon. And Dad said, we're going into Victoria and New South Wales because I want to go to a sheep sale. And I also want to go and look at a plane to buy. That was the version of the honeymoon Mum got. But I think the piece here is that then went for what would take multiple days to do a water run would take 2 days driving around. And you could now do that in 2 hours in the plane, right? What would take a week to muster a paddock could take a number of hours. So really transformational shifts if you think about that from the kind of 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. And then when I was looking at my generation coming in and working with my family on the land, I was sort of looking for what's the next step change here, right? Like pretty big step changes in those previous decades. So what's the big step change here? Anything from remote water monitoring, because it's still a huge cost if you're flying around for 2 hours to check waters, to, how are we making better decisions? And, we were doing a lot of innovation from a land restoration perspective. We did a lot of work around bringing practices actually in from South Africa. We were the first in South Australia, but a couple first in Australia to take on this kind of new practice where you would bring in some erosion control water management practices, basically build some banks, slow the water down from when it actually does rain. Keep in mind our rainfall is about 7.5 inches or 200 mils of rain a year. So it doesn't rain much, but when it does, you want to capture it so it doesn't just wash down a gum creek. So we were kind of doing a lot of this restoration work, but I was still looking for ways of how can we make better decisions? How can we actually really focus on what's working and what's not? So one thing we looked at was software on the digital side, and we actually bought some software. It would have been at this point more than 30 years ago, showing my age here, Jeremy, but probably more than 30 years ago. It came on a floppy disk. Some people don't even know what that is now, but it came on a floppy disk, and it basically stayed that way in the top drawer of the office. So basically there wasn't a software, and we did not use software. It was very much pencil and paper, the green or red notebook. In our case, it was green at the time. In the top pocket, it was back of the envelope. It was writing on the dash in the dust of your stock numbers, those types of things, which is not uncommon, right? And it's still done today, to be fair. I think the number one kind of record keeping tool is still pencil and paper. But that was a bit of a flavor of, for me personally, there's got to be a better way to drive better decision making, more efficiencies. So I thought very much about what's the next step change in livestock agriculture, given that was my passion and upbringing to sheep and cattle station. So that then led to how I think about my career and where we went to from there.
So 2014, I think, was when AgriWebb was founded. Would you mind just describing perhaps what the vision was for it then and maybe just the first sort of few years of that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went and did other things professionally. It's an interesting, I think when I was growing up, I was really passionate about agriculture as an industry and thought I really want to be in this industry. But this was just my view. I don't know if this is categorically true, but I have seen a big shift. It wasn't thought of as kind of a profession with immense opportunities. If you were going to study an ag degree, when I finished high school in 2002, the reason you would do that is because it was pretty limited. Your folks told you that you had to do a course before you went back to farm, right? Number one. Number two was a deep passion for science, the ag science side of things. So you'd go into a research type role or an industry type role, or you wanted to be close to the land and you thought, I'm going to become a vet or I'm going to become, in crop science or something like that. That was kind of it, to be fair. Again, this is just my view. So
And you weren't smart enough to get into engineering or something.
exactly. It could have been a bit of a default, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it was either the cultural view or there just legitimately wasn't the opportunities there. So for me, and I'm speaking personally, I kind of did some ag courses and those types of things, but I ended up doing a degree in law and arts in environmental studies, not because I actually wanted to become a lawyer by any means, but more around I wanted to set myself up professionally to go and learn some skills and trade outside of the industry. At some point when the time was right, I'm going to bring that back. I think before I kind of continue talking about the AgriWebb side, the thing that I'm really excited and proud to see is that cultural shift and the opportunities have shifted immensely, absolutely immensely. You look at the kids enrolled in ag-related courses, food-related courses, sustainability-related courses. It's unbelievable. And it's not just country kids anymore. It's actually the opposite. You've got by the truckloads and droves of kids and professionals and young professionals being like, I want to be in this industry, and actually seeing food production and I guess the broader agricultural ecosystem as one of the absolute critical areas that we want to be involved in. And I'm telling that because I think that's awesome. It's actually true, right? There's a few key industries that keep the world going: agriculture, food production, fiber production, energy, water. That there's a few that kind of matter, and the old ag industry had just been left to those that may have grown up on a farm, and that's changed. So I think that's great.
John, I appreciate you saying it, and it's probably not something we stop and acknowledge enough, but agribusiness and the whole ecosystem, it's a massive industry now, and there are so many opportunities for everyone who wants to come in. And I think you're right. We're getting momentum, aren't we, with the quality and the caliber of people that we're seeing return sort of through uni and through other vocations back into the industry, which is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this then leads part into the AgriWebb story, because at the time we founded the business, of course, there's been technology and innovation in agriculture, absolutely. However, it has very much been in other sectors outside of livestock production, right? Now, we've seen massive investment in innovation in cropping, as an example, led by the big green John Deeres of the world that have driven enormous innovation in machinery and infrastructure. We've seen lots around seed genetics, which is technology and innovation. We've seen a lot in the dairy space, right, around optimizing dairy production, Impala, those types of scenarios. When we look at livestock, sure, we've seen innovation in genetics. We've seen innovation in some of the farm practices, but we have not seen large scale capital investment, really smart, fired up, energetic people to do something about it. And at the end of the day, agriculture is the least digitized industry in the world, and livestock agriculture is the least digitized of the least digitized. So that's the base that ultimately we were coming from. And so that's what we dedicated our lives to going to do something about. Because I had a background in that. There's 3 founders at AgriWebb. Justin Webb, who also has a family farm in Victoria, has a similar story around coming back to family farm when his dad got sick. And, he has a finance background, sitting across the kitchen table from all of the advisors, the agronomists and whatever else, and being asked to make decisions around fertilizer and inputs and these types of things. And his simple question was, well, where's the data? Right? Where's the data that I can look at so we can make more informed decisions? They're like, well, what do you mean? We've just always done it like this. So that got him thinking about, well, surely there's some software out there. Surely there's a better way to make some decisions here. So that's his personal story of AgriWebb. And then Kevin Baum, our CEO and third co-founder, ag background whatsoever, born and bred East Coast of the US, grew up and went to college basically through Stanford, through Silicon Valley, and brings a very technology-based approach to how we thought about this. And I guess this then gets into, the three of us came together. We met in all different shapes of life and decided that we would commit to this when we all could have gone and done other things. We all had professional backgrounds. And, at the time I was living in London. I'd been there for about 4 years, and I was actually working in some law in a technology company. So I was very far removed from agriculture and the family farm. And we got connected. It's ultimately, we got connected through, as it turns out, a mate of mine. I was having a beer in London, and I was talking about all the opportunities and my passion for ag tech, and thinking like, we're on the brink of this. It's the start of something pretty big here. And he's like, look, you got to go and meet these two other guys. I just finished studying them in England. They'd just done an MBA. He's like, you got to meet these two guys, who turns out to be Justin and Kevin, who have just gone back to Australia to look at this. And this was in 2014. And so I had a Skype chat. No one really uses Skype now, but that was the only platform at the time. I had a Skype chat when I was still in London. We kind of got on a house on fire of this is the opportunity, this is what we could do. And within weeks, I had quit my job in London, convinced my now wife to quit her job. She had a better job than me, to be fair, and moved back to Australia, back to Melbourne, actually. And we had never met each other. I had not met my business partners. And everyone was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you leaving this kind of pretty unique professional life here in London? You haven't even met these guys. Like, this could go belly up. And my response to that was, the three of us could be doing any other thing we decided to do, right? But we've decided that we're going to have a decent crack at this and dedicate a good chunk of our lives to this. So we're in it, and we mean business here. So we're all in. And look, worst case scenario, these things are reversible, at least in the early days. So that was the founding story. We then met. So the three of us are business partners from day one. We're still business partners now, but we're also best mates, which is pretty unique. We're now 12 years in, effectively, 11, 12 years in, to still have that bond and get to where we've got to.
Just describe that first sort of 12 months, 2 years to me, and what was the first iteration of the business model and the goals that you set down, and
Yep.
And what did that first period of growth look like practically?
Yeah, I mean, again, I could tell stories for hours on this, but I mean, the way we approached this was getting a little bit back to what I was talking before around where the industry was at. We approached this from, look, we are going to build a software company in this industry in the best practice and best principles of how to build a software platform that adds value, versus we're in agriculture, let's go and build a business in agriculture. So I guess it was almost like, we're going to build a software business that happens to be in agriculture. And I don't want the impression to be we're sitting in our ivory tower and we're telling people what to do. Absolutely, categorically not. And we took very clear steps to not do that. But what we'd seen before was, I mean, there were other software companies out there doing work in livestock. We were not the first by any means, but we were the first to do things very differently. And what I mean by that was, we made a decision from day one that we were going to go raise capital to invest in growth. We were not going to build, for better or worse, and we can talk about the shifts over the last decade, but for better or worse, we decided that we are going to inject capital into this business. We're going to drive at growth. We are going to drive at as much impact and value creation as we absolutely can across our client base, and not blindly, the rest will figure it out. But that's how we approach this. So with that in mind, we raised some early capital from the classic friends, family, and fools, as you'd hear that expression. And the first thing we did is, on the company and team side, we need to go and find the best possible people we can, right? And so that started with finding technical people, software engineers. The three of us, quite uniquely, are not software engineers, and we have different areas of skills and expertise, but we're not software engineers. So we went and found the best people we could find. And we, obviously convinced them on the mission and the vision and the dream of what we're out to create, which was very much, we're in the least digitized industry. We have global ambitions. We want to have impact and make lives better for people on the ground. And one thing that I always, I'll get back to the rest of the growth story here, but one thing that bugs me about the farming industry is we've got lots of people out there running farms, but not many running a business, right? And so we wanted to change the mentality and help do that play our role through software and data-driven decisions and connectivity and driving collaboration. And that was our role in that. And our vision from the start, so going and hiring the best people we can find, then finding early customers, listening deeply to early customers. We founded a business in Melbourne, so 2 years in Melbourne before we relocated to Sydney. Those first 2 years, I spent 90% of the time on the road. I mean, I literally was driving around southeast of South Australia, Western Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Tasmania. I mean, every state, in fact, with a swag in the back of the car, staying in cockroach-filled hotels. It was not glamorous by any means. And we were across the kitchen table. We were at field days. We were setting up small events, feedback sessions. We were trying to nurture those conversations to try and find that early product market fit of what problems we were looking to solve for. The early problems we're looking to solve, which we knew was a problem from our own experience, was how do we digitize that notebook, right? That notebook that's sitting in the top pocket with a smartphone. So it's got to work offline. It's got to be visual. It's got to be based around the map. But ultimately what we're solving in those early times is, I want to know where my animals are. I want to know how many animals I have. Basic inventory. Getting back to how can you run a business if you don't know your inventory? So that was the simple problem that we were solving. But people weren't used to using software or technology at that point in time. The strategy, though, was, and still is, to be fair. I mean, it's still slide number one in every presentation is literally an image of one of our first customers holding their green notebook and holding the smartphone with the AgriWebb app and the map on it. That sums up what we're about, what we started with and what we do today. The next slide is what our strategy and vision for is how can we help as many farming businesses and lives as possible, i.e. get on as many farms as possible globally and collect as much data as possible. And we're super clear about this. Farmers own their data. We do not share that with anyone else, but we want to unlock value creation for them and the broader ecosystem. So that then gets to how can we engage the supply chain? How can we engage everybody that buys and sells and interacts with farmers at the farm gate? And our role in that is through the data. Now, we can talk a bit more about that later, but that was a strategy from day one. And to talk about what was that like when we were in those early conversations with farmers, from day one, we were thinking about, well, farmers aren't going to buy software. Farmers are not going to buy software, even though that was part of the end game for us. So in the early years, we actually manufactured remote water sensors. Not many people know about this story, apart from some of our early customers in Western Vic and wherever else, that we still actually have some of these sensors hanging out of troughs and tanks. But we actually had hardware. Kevin and I were driving around installing sensors in troughs in belting rain in Western Victoria with the headlights of the car on to try and get these sensors to work. Now, the reason for that is remote water monitoring is a massive problem. I saw it in our family business. It's a massive problem across just about every livestock operation. And our view at the time was we didn't want to be hardware providers, but we thought we needed that as a hook. And it was always integrated into our first version of the app so that, hey, buy the water sensors, then you'll use our app, then you'll actually get the value creation of the data platform. So that was the idea and the strategy from day one. And then we're thinking about how do we help the sale of livestock online. But what it turned out to be, hard was really hard, and we just never could get the sensors right. They're about 90% right. And we were like, so they never got out of beta. But what happened was we had the software in the hands of a bunch of farmers at this point, and they were like, we just want the software. Like, we don't actually care about, like, this is good, keep working on that, but like, I just want the software. And so that was a huge light bulb moment for us, massive light bulb moment. And we couldn't have dumped that hardware play quicker, right? We switched that off.
Was your feedback then that there was an appetite to pay for the software?
Yeah, there was, right? And part of it, I think, was there's a real need for this. The other part, speaking, I think, honestly, is we just built a lot of trust with our customers. And I'll tell this with our early customers. I'll tell this one quick story. It turns out to be our first customer, right, in Victoria. We'd worked with James for months, right? Trialed the software. At this point in time, it was on a physical tablet. We didn't have it across multiple devices. It was on an Android tablet with a tough case. It was your farm management tool. We were selling it as a farm management tool. So he trialed it, he tested it. I'd had numerous cups of coffee with him and his family and whatever else. And we did this one visit, and it was basically the time he was going to buy. He was going to buy the software because he'd tried it for a bunch of times, and we said, "Look, we'll give you a deal, and this is what it's going to cost, and whatever else." And so we're heading out from Melbourne, and I see James at the end of the driveway, right, on the main road, and I said to Kevin, I said, "Gee, this is not a good sign." And Kevin's like, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, every other time we've had a cup of coffee over the kitchen table, the fact that he's meeting us on the main road of the driveway, I don't think we're doing business today." Anyway, sure enough, after like shuffling a bit of dirt, kicking stones around, James is like, "Yeah, look, lads, I'm not going to buy it. It's been a great experience, but I'm just not going to buy it." And we were, well, why not? And he's like, "Well, it does a few things I'm looking for, but it doesn't do a few of the key things I'm really interested in. And one of them, it needs to be on my phone, right?" He's like, it needs to be on my phone. I don't want to carry another device, right? I've got my phone. That's one of the issues. So anyway, we drove back to Melbourne. It was on a Friday, very somber drive home. And we called Justin, our obviously the third co-founder. And we were like, look, meanwhile, this guy had found us online when we hardly had a website and put a contact us out, which no one ever does anyway. And that's how we found him. And we're like, look, if this guy has found us when we don't exist, he's tried our product for months and he's not going to buy it, like, we're cooked. No, we're done. We may as well wrap the show up. Anyway, over the weekend, I came back in on a Monday and I said, I'm going to call James back. I'm going to call him. So I did. And I called him. I said, "James, I know you said you're not going to buy it and whatever else, but I've been reflecting over the weekend. And I just wanted to see if you've thought more about it." And he says, "Look, I'm really glad you called. I was going to call you. I have thought a lot about this and I am going to buy it, right? I am going to buy it." And it's not because it solves all the problems that I want it to solve. It's actually because if people like me don't invest in people like you, this industry will never go anywhere. And so that there was like, you see, I get emotional talking about this now, a decade on, but that for us was a big lift in, okay, if we can go and find people to come on this journey and be early adopters and be innovators with us, right, we'll get there. So that was our first customer, and that's what we did, right? We went and found these nodes of early customers, and we built trusted relationships, and we responded to their feedback. And we built things not just because they asked for it, but we built it in a way that we could see that it solved many problems and that we could scale that. And so that's coupled with finding the best people, bringing in growth capital, and being really grassroots with a view of how do we scale this is the foundation of AgriWebb.
How close on reflection do you think AgriWebb was to not making that next step beyond James? Was it as close as you described?
I think it was. As you know, building businesses is very difficult, right? Most businesses fail, right? Any business, most businesses fail. And at the time, we were looking to raise some more funds, and we had to show customers, right? I mean, we got some early capital to kind of proof of concept, but we had to show customers. And so it wasn't about revenue generation necessarily. Like, we weren't out there to say, oh, well, like, we need to pay the payroll. It was about, we need to find a convincing story to get backing. And if we did not get James Lilly and the subsequent customers that flowed from that, like, we wouldn't have got capital and there would be no AgriWebb. It's very simple as that. So I'm not dramatizing this. There's been very binary points in time of AgriWebb's journey. The next binary point in time was effective.
Well, just before we go on, how I can only imagine that those early adopters, those first hatful of clients, had to be patient, or didn't have all the problems solved. How do you want to acknowledge them and their loyalty to the early days of AgriWebb?
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, we're obviously so thankful for, that cohort of early adopters. And we have actually got them in our system that are still on an early adopter plan. There's about 30 to 40 that sit in that bucket. And we kind of did this bit of a campaign at the time where we said, look, we're going to hold this open to the first 30. And it was actually a cutoff point. 30 June was the time. And we said, look, if you guys get on board, you've got to pay a little bit up front for the tablet because we're still selling tablets, but it's free for life. You will have software for free for life. We will not charge you an annual subscription. If you back us, we'll support you. So that was our way of, at the start, getting the innovators in that believed in it. And I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but they're all still using it and they're all still on. So we've obviously honored that, absolutely. And I would love the opportunity one day to get to a pub and invite all those guys along and be like, look, we wouldn't be here without you. So hopefully we get to do that one day. But absolutely. I mean, if it wasn't for those guys, like we just wouldn't be here. It's really simple, just the way it works out. So it's we couldn't be more grateful for people coming on the journey.
Maybe there's just a reminder and a lesson there that the little decisions we make to back early adopt or back startups and companies that are pioneering in our industry, it's so important as participants in the industry that we continue to do that. For us, John, it was 18 founding members down in Southeast and South Australia and on KI, and they're still with us. And at our 10th birthday this year, we got to acknowledge them for their patience and their commitment to us. And we wouldn't exist if it wasn't for them. So it's really nice that you do acknowledge them as you do.
Yeah, that's great. Well, congrats on that. That's awesome.
So, John, jumping forward, would you mind just describing the business AgriWebb as you see it today?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. I mean, where we sit today, we're a global business. We actually have customers in 28 countries now, but our core areas of focus are naturally Australia, where our roots are, and most of the team. I mean, in Australia, we over 25% of all the sheep and cattle in Australia are on the platform. UK was the next market we entered in 2018. We then opened the US in 2020, right before COVID. That's an interesting story in itself. And then, we opened up Brazil in 2022. They're I would say, our key markets on the basis that we have staff and boots on the ground. And actually, we have a remote team in South Africa as well. But across that, we've got over 20 million head of animals on the platform. We support over 20,000 farmers that use our products. We've got 75, a staff of 75 at AgriWebb that are based across those regions, as I mentioned. The bulk is still in Australia, but Australia, UK, US, Brazil, South Africa. That's kind of sort of high level, and we still onboard 100 new farming organizations a month, right? I mean, that is still the core of what we do.
How does it feel saying that? Just sitting there describing the business today, looping back to 2014, how does it feel to describe that you are supporting 20,000 farms, 25% of Australia's livestock, team of 75 in 28 countries?
Well, good question. And I think the first thing is, do you ever actually stop and reflect on any of this, right? I think that's the first bit, because you're always chasing the next goal and the next challenge. So we've always tried to make sure we have kind of celebratory milestones, right, along the way of when we get there, what's the next thing. But, we're incredibly proud. I mean, it's been a hell of a journey, and it's obviously not stopping, but it's been a very heartfelt journey from a customer perspective, from a team perspective. I mean, we've got 75 families that we're helping support, and the culture we have built around the company is something we're most proud of, actually. We do culture surveys. I'm sure a lot of people do, but, the results are something like 98% of people recommend AgriWebb as a place to work. Like, people just don't leave us. I mean, we have not had anyone in our engineering team, we have not had one regrettable turnover. Something to be said, particularly in software engineering, where they could go across the street absolutely to Atlassian or Facebook or Google or insert, right, that will pay them a lot more than what they get paid at AgriWebb. Definitely. And they don't, right? And they don't because the culture we've built, but it's also the mission and vision and impact that we are delivering for our farming communities. And I think that's the thing we're most proud of.
How do you and how does AgriWebb do culture? Are there any specific things that help define what it is that makes you a unique team and a unique place to build out your career?
Yeah, often people ask about, how do you define culture in AgriWebb? And you could go down all these rabbit warrens. I think at the end of the day, we have a very trusted, open, flexible environment, which people value, and they value a lot in this day and age. But the two things are like our core value at AgriWebb, our core value is we live for the farmer, right? And so people are so bought into that. And half the team, not even half, right? A percentage of the team are off farms that are in the industry, but the other half aren't. It gets back to what I was saying before around people that are engaged in this industry now that weren't previously. These people haven't been on a farm, have never seen a cow or whatever, and they are so engaged in not only how we can help the farming family and business, but how we can do better for food production, how we can have a more sustainable environment. People care about that, right? Deeply. And that's ultimately why they're here, because they get up every day and we're having an impact that means something. And I mean, I can tell a story of Kevin, right, our CEO and co-founder. I mean, he decided that he wanted to start AgriWebb when all his mates were going off to Twitter and all the other tech companies working out how to send photos to each other. And he was like, that's not real. That's not meaningful. I want to have impact in a real industry. And so I think at the end of the day, that is a big driver for people, but it's also around how we are still innovators, right? How we act with integrity, how we have really large ambitions, but we do it in a very calculated approach. So I think it's all of those components pulled together. And of course, we do things from a team perspective to drive engagement and those types of things. And of course, it's not perfect. We can always do better. But every time a survey comes out, we look at the low scoring and we then put in ways that we're going to improve. So of course, we're not perfect. But I think it's one thing that we have maintained from day one is that authenticity and openness and transparency.
Let's join the dots and loop back. You mentioned that first 2-year period and you were starting to touch on the next stage of growth. I'd almost like just to hand over to you, John, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us, how do you see, what were the key milestone steps that AgriWebb took, and perhaps what were some of the challenges and hurdles that you had to overcome?
Yeah, talked about our early cohort of early adopters, right, which we wouldn't be here without them categorically. The next big hurdle outside of the day-to-day, right, outside of what features we're going to build and how do we support customers and the day-to-day side of running a software business, how do we find more customers, what's our go-to-market, those types of things. How do we scale this? Because, I mean, from that go-to-market side, it was very much, we were doing things grassroots, right? We'd built up a team of 4 kind of regional BDMs, state-based, WA, SA, Victoria, New South Wales. And these guys were driving around with, an AgriWebb sticker on the car. And we were very much field days, driving down driveways. And that absolutely had to be done. I've still maintained it to this day. And we still do that in a certain capacity around staying engaged with our customers. But that was not scalable to where we are today at AgriWebb. It just was not scalable because the unit economics just don't work out, right? You cannot, for the amount we charge for the software, it doesn't cover the costs of the customer acquisition costs. It just doesn't. So we had to work out how we scale that. So this was all the sorts of things we were learning, and I'll come back to that. But another pivotal point in our time, which I've talked about, the early adopters, and we got them in and we raised another round of funding, which was on that first year of customers that paid, to be with us. Would they renew? Would they renew after 12 months of using the software? Because software is a renewal game, right? And that was such a stressful period of time because if they didn't renew, like you're not adding value, right? And we don't have a business. So that was the next pivotal moment. And much to our delight, we did not have one customer that churned, not one. Now, we didn't have hundreds and hundreds of customers, but we probably had 100, we had 150. right, at the time. And so that was the next stage of, okay, we've got something here. Like, we're adding a lot of value, and we now need to go and figure out how to scale this thing. So that was another key point in time. Now, to this day, our churn rate, which is the rate that people leave you, is still very, very low from the software side of things. I mean, we're kind of under 1% a month, call it 0.8%. Now, it's still too much. Like, I still don't like it. I hate seeing that number. I hate it. It bothers me deeply. Now, some you can't help, right? Which is sold the farm, etc. And that does play a part. But when I see customers, and again, it's very low. It's not one of the things that keeps me up at night, but I don't like anyone leaving us where it's, oh, I haven't seen value, or I put it down, or I couldn't convince my staff to use it. All those things bug me to no end because we can control that. We can fix that. So that's just a side note. Like, that's on us. That's on us. So
Yeah.
we can do better. But that was key. And then I think getting back to how we thought about scaling this, I came back from we kind of did this accelerator course, and I kind of came back and I was like, we're not doing anything digitally at this point. It was pretty grassroots. I was like, we need to up our digital game. And so, we had a guy now in the business that's still with us today. He's been with us for 10 or so years, and he would literally do anything, right? Roll up the sleeves, get it done. Great story in its own right. He's Canadian, never set foot on a farm, built a few frozen yogurt shops, and ended up at AgriWebb, and now is one of our key leaders.
You better name drop him so we give him a plug.
Yeah. So his name's Campbell Morgan. We were hiring for a regional BDM that had a network of farmers that they could call on. That was the role that we had out in market, and we'd got this recruiter on board. The recruiter came back and he's like, "Oh, I've got this candidate for you." We're like, "Great. Where are they based?" "Oh, no. Like, they're based in Melbourne." We're like, "Okay." And sent through the CV. He's like, just hear me out. So we see the CV, right? Frozen yogurt shops from Canada in Melbourne for 6 months or whatever. And we're like, I just flat out said, I'm not even meeting this guy. I said, no, I'm just not doing it. Kevin was like, look, I'll take a coffee. Had a coffee with this guy, it's all suit and tie and whatever else. And he messaged me. He's like, you got to come down and meet this guy. I was like, oh, all right, fine, whatever. Anyway, 5 minutes in, we're like, we've got to hire this guy. And he came on and literally would like us, roll up the sleeves, get it done, innovate. How do we do it better? And I'm telling this story because we didn't have head of marketing person at this point in time. It was kind of sales driven, and we had handed off to him, the customer support, which was like the mobile phone at that point because we didn't have infrastructure. Customers were calling our mobiles on the support side. So we got some support infrastructure set up, right? Some help desk, those types of things. And then he's like, right, well, I'm gonna take a crack at this digital marketing. I'm gonna get that spun up. So we started marketing through Google and Facebook and all the very traditional means now, but no one was doing this in ag, particularly in soil. Like, no one was doing it, and we certainly hadn't started doing it. So this was the start of the scalability. And so we started much more what's now a very sophisticated model of marketing, content-based education, driving customers or prospects, I should say, into a free trial of the software. And then, we have an inbound sales team that would take them on their way, and then an onboarding team. And that didn't happen in those early days. It was driving down a driveway and get you set up, and well, that's it, right? And so that's been a journey over time, but that's a very efficient business model now in Australia. Very efficient business model, and we welcome 100 new clients a month in that model. But that all starts somewhere, right? And you've got to iterate and innovate and kind of get that infrastructure set up. And that's also gets back to what I said at the start around we have taken the approach of what's best practice in software businesses and apply it to agriculture. So that was all part of, okay, this is how we're gonna go run this business, which was unique at the time.
What was it about Campbell in that coffee interview that impressed you guys so much?
I think it's always when you have interviews with people and what you're looking for, it was the ability to think creatively. It was the ability to try, experiment, and just roll up the sleeves and go and get it done, because that's what you need in the early days, right? And he had those qualities. I mean, he was early 20s at the time, had, decided he was going to go and buy some frozen yogurt franchise shops on his own, and he built 3 of them successfully. And that in itself is a characteristic that you don't often see. And the other thing is he obviously couldn't fit the role of driving down driveways, right? So that role was off the table. And we said to him, he's like, Campbell, we got nothing for you. We got nothing for you. And he's like, I'll do anything. I'll do anything. He's like, I will do your admin. It's embarrassing how much we paid him at the time to come on board. He was literally packaging up tablets in bubble wrap and taking them to the post office because that's how we were shipping our product because it was still on a tablet form. So an absolute trooper.
What's his role now, John?
So he works with me and my team on all of our whole enterprise strategy. So now he is at the forefront of conversations with the largest food companies in the world. And we're talking McDonald's and Nestle and Cargill and Audi and you name it. He is at the forefront of those conversations at a global level.
A shout out to you, Campbell. One of the favorite articles that I have we give to new team members is the habit of going the extra mile and that willingness to go the extra mile, whatever that is. And it's only people that progress in careers that have that built-in habit and that deep willingness just to do whatever it takes and go the extra mile. What a great example.
Yeah, and just to finish on that, gets back to kind of our expansion story. We wanted to be a global business, right? And so we made very deliberate moves of when we were going to do that. And I'll come back and tell a bit more about that. But this one example was we needed someone to go to the UK, our first geography outside of Australia, and we needed a country manager. And Campbell put his hand up and we shipped him and his now wife across to Belfast initially and then into London. And, he's a man for the job. So that's kind of a bit of a story on the people side. But I guess getting back to the milestones, right? That the next milestone is that 2018 on international expansion. And it's twofold in that because we wanted to be a global business, but you don't want to do it too early. And I would say a lot of companies do it too early. And we did it too early as well, I think, on reflection. You should never, it's rule of thumb, it's 10 times more expensive and it takes 10 times as long as what you think it's going to be to enter a new geography. And so I hear it all the time in ag tech and not just ag tech, other tech companies. US is the biggest market. We've got to get to the US. We're going to go to the US, right? Take a flight over there and run around. And yes, it's likely, depending on what industry, US will be your biggest market, but it's also a market that will chew you up and spit you out and spend all your money. And so if you go too early, it's not going to work out for you, right? Things like product market fit, scalability around your product, scalability around your go-to-market, the localization and nuances in those markets are very real from a product software side, from a cultural, social side are real and underestimated a lot. And people go too early when they don't have all of that sorted out. And there's other kind of key numbers that you should be at a certain revenue level and you should have all this in order before you go and do that. I don't think we were quite ready for that. The reason we actually went into the UK is we'd done a whole bunch of trips around the UK. We'd done a whole bunch of trips around the US. Every year we're on the road, every year, looking at where next, really doing our market research. And we actually looked at the UK and said, I don't think we're going to go there first. I think we'll go to the US first. But in fact, that's not what happened. At this point in time, we needed to raise more capital and we had tapped out the Aussie venture market, right? The appetite was not there to invest at the levels we needed to. So we had to go offshore. Now, when you go offshore to get capital, 9 times out of 10, probably 10 times out of 10, like if you're not operating in the market and sector that investors in, you're probably not going to get the money, right? So for example, if you want a US venture capital firm to invest in you and you're not in the US or you don't have a clear plan and a strategy of how to execute in the US, they're not going to invest. And why would they? I mean, with their venture capital perspective, they're going to be like looking at Australia, don't know the market. How big is it? Not sure. We know our market. If you're not here, I'm out. And so we brought on a very strategic investor for us out of the UK. And part of that investment was, and the company's called Grosvenor Food and Ag. They are they're a VC, but based off a large family office that invests in agriculture, right? Lots of forms in agriculture, but they're also a long-term player. They're not in it for quick wins. And agriculture is not a quick win, and we're not in it for quick wins. So they're a very strategic partner for us, a long-term investment partner, and they have continued to be a great long-term investment partner for the last decade, call it. Not quite a decade, but close to it. And part of that investment, like all things, they owned another software company in the UK. And part of the deal was you need to take that on. You need to acquire that company as part of. So we acquired a company. We acquired another software company in the UK, a company called Farm Wizard. And so this was another part of the journey. And we had to go through integrating that business into our business, people, technology, customers. And that was a huge, huge learning curve for us, massive learning curve. And again, it's not as easy as what you think it is. There's so many learnings in there. It's a whole nother episode probably, but a couple of quick ones was, oh, look, we're going to get all these customers, right? We're going to get them on our platform because our platform's shinier and more visual. They're going to love it, right? And we're just going to get all these customers on. We're going to transition them to our platform. Well, of course, it doesn't work like that. People don't like change. Customers don't like change. It may have been a legacy software, but that's what they're using. I don't want to change. I like this one, right? And so then we started running into all these types of challenges. So two things. It drove us into that market probably before we wanted to be in that market. It also took us into acquiring a company, which brought its own set of challenges. But the main thing, what it did do, which set us up for a lot of success, was it drove us into building an individual animal management capability. Because when we started AgriWebb, it was mob-based, herd-based, right? Because that was the biggest pain point and the biggest mode of operation of people managing their herds and mobs at that level. But the UK is the most compliant market globally around information you need to capture on farm, which then needs to be shared with the government databases, right? And that was largely driven off mad cow disease and the need for traceability and biosecurity and those types of things. But in simple terms, like a sheep and cattle farmer over there, they need to log every animal individually with a system. They need to log a birth within 30 days of it being born. They need to log all the animal health treatments. It's a very high level of rigor over there.
Which Australia wasn't requiring back then. So it probably got you ready ahead of the curve, did it not? For what
exactly.
Yeah.
It really drove the compliance side of our business, right? So it did two things. We could not operate in that market without being an individual system because everything's tagged individually. So we then went and built all of our individual animal management capability, which was always on the strategic roadmap. It just accelerated that. So that then gave us it opened up other segments of the market, meaning we can now offer mob or herd, but also individual, right? Integrating with all of the hardware, Gallagher, TrueTest, Tapari, etc. And it also gave us the capability to integrate with all the government databases. So that then led to NLIS and ENBD and our security plans back in the Australian market. So we took the capability that we had to build for that market and could bring it into the Aussie market. So that was another key point in time. It also started our journey of the next layer of our business, which is our enterprise business.
What a great story. From School of the Air, from dusty, remote, memorable upbringings to an idea to replace the pocket notebook to what is now a truly global and great Aussie brand on an international agribusiness scale. John, thanks for your openness and for sharing, and look forward to expanding on this conversation and to more time with you in a couple of weeks. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Profitable Farmer podcast by Farm Owners Academy. If you're new to this show, be sure to follow us. If you've been a long-time listener, let your friends know about us or come continue the conversation in the Profitable Farmer Facebook group. All the best as you grow your business and create your freedom farm. Until next time, keep being incredible.